righty. Thank you, Todd. I hope everyone's doing well. Welcome to the orbiting Bacon space station. I hope you're all safe and well wherever you may be. So I'm thrilled to be here. I absolutely love the work that Todd and the team do. I love all things open. It's a real bummer that we're not going to be there in person in Austin today, but it's so awesome the fact that we're all here to get together virtually. It's the truest essence of community. So I'm going to talk today for about 15 minutes, and you don't have to know a lot about open source to get a lot out of this, but every one of you is going to influence a community in some way. You may join a community, you may start a community, it doesn't really matter. And I think this will be very, very relevant to you. So as a little bit of backstory, I was raised in a place in Northern England. It was very boring and it was very picturesque, okay? It looked a little bit like this. And when I was growing up, I heard the same thing over and over again. People don't really know their neighbors like they did back in the good old days. My parents, my grandparents, everybody waffled on and on about how the sense of community was kind of dying and leaving. And this wasn't my experience. You know, when I was like 18 or 19 years old, I looked like this. This is a picture a friend of mine, Stuart, and I dug up while at the pub just before the coronavirus. And I started a website called Linux UK, which looked a little bit like this. And this was designed to kind of get people in the UK together. This was back in 1998. And I was just excited about meeting other open source people. I went to university, started a Linux user group called Wolverhampton Linux User Group, and then met some people there and got interested in a project called KDE. So organized a booth down at a conference in London. You can see the, printed out bits of paper and iron-on decals on t-shirts and things like that. And then down at that conference, ended up bumping into a couple of guys in a pub who started a magazine called Linux Format Magazine. And I said to them, do you mind if I write an article for you? And they said, sure, but if it's terrible, we won't publish it, which seemed like reasonable terms. So anyway, I started talking about a place that just opened up near where I lived called Open Advantage, which provided free training and consulting to people who were upskilling into open source, who used to work in factories and manufacturing. And that led me out to go and fly around the world and meet people at conferences. I got interested in the GNOME project and kicked off a project called Jacosha. And then that led to building a community around that particular project. The whole reason why I'm going through this condensed biography is because when I kept hearing this, people don't know their neighbors like they did back in the good old days, I wasn't seeing it. I was seeing this amazing group of people all over the world who come together. And this is what's so exciting about this to me, is that community is out there and it's thriving. What is happening right now is a good example of this. And what this is this international network of minds who come together to share experience and talent and expertise. And open source, I think, is a wonderful example of this. So, it's not just my experience. We've seen the growth of Wikipedia. We've seen open source dominating every possible industry, from the cloud to infrastructure to devices. We've seen the maker revolution happen. Many of you will have kids who are making things, who are creating interesting little inventions, which is unlocking their creativity. We've seen the democratization of funding with crowdfunding. And it's not just these areas. We've seen Salesforce and SAP build communities of over 1 million members. Harley-Davidson, over 1,700 local user groups. Lego allow their community members to make Lego sets. IGN bring gamers together. HitRecord allows people to work together on productions that many of which have been shown at Sundance. So there's so much community excitement going on out there. And to me, it gets back to this network of minds, is that we're stronger together, is that when we unlock that potential, we can really get out there and do almost anything. But to me, what's really exciting about this is open source. This is what got me into it. And this, to me, is one of the finest examples of what makes community so powerful. And one of the reasons why open source works so well is that we're able to get together and share the same material. Like there can be somebody, I'm here in California on the orbiting space station, and there may be someone out there in Warsaw and we could both work on exactly the same project. We can have the same content, the code, the documentation. We can coordinate online events now. We have the ability to work together effectively. So in this session, I want to walk through some things that I've learned over the course of my career that I think are relevant to any of you who are getting interested in communities. It doesn't matter whether you want to set up a local group about open source in your town, or whether you want to start an open source project or join an open source project. It doesn't require having a ton of experience. These are 3 things I think are important for you to bear in mind. The first one is that the best experiences are journeys, okay? If any of you have been at Disney World, when you show up and you park your car and you buy your tickets and that you go in through the gate and then they guide you around the park and how the restaurants open and serve the right amount of traffic, everything is carefully curated. If you look at great restaurants, from how you show up and they pour you water and they bring you the menus and then you order from the menu and they bring you it at the right cadence, everything is carefully orchestrated. Video games are another example. I just bought Luigi's Mansion 3 for my son recently, and we were both playing it. The first couple of levels are very, very carefully designed for you to pick up the controls and feel a sense of accomplishment. Here's the thing. Your community needs to be more than this. It needs to be more than just a GitHub repo. It needs to be more than just a meetup page. It needs to be more than just the basics of you being on the internet. It needs to be the whole experience in how we build that journey out. Now, you may be thinking, okay, Jono, how on earth do we do that? Well, this is how I would recommend it. And this is one of the things Todd mentioned. I got this book, People Powered. This is how I would recommend you approach it. And I covered this in the book. The first thing we do is we understand who our audience is. You know, do we want to attract developers, event organizers? Do we want people to use our software or come to our events? And then we design an onboarding experience that's really simple for them to do something that's valuable for them. So if they want to join your community and ask a question and get an answer, that's an onboarding experience. If they want to contribute their first bit of code to an open source project, that's their onboarding experience. The point is that we simplify this, because you can go and do as much promotion as you want in the whole world. And if they all come through the front door and no one knows how to get started, then they're kind of screwed, okay? So think about what are the 5 or 6 steps that they need to go through from learning about your community to how they do something that's valuable for them. Now what we do is we break them into 3 phases of a journey. I call them casual, regulars, and core. So when you're casual, you kind of new, you don't really know what's going on. Just think about when you first joined Open Source 101 today. You didn't really know anyone. This whole new platform is a little bit weird and kind of unusual. It's cool, but it's different, right? There's a lot of insecurity. A lot of people experience imposter syndrome, especially people who are in underrepresented groups can especially find this a really difficult phase to kind of get into. So we need to make this really simple for them to get started in. When people are regulars, this is where they've been around for a couple of months and they're hanging out and they've kind of got to know people. And then the core members are the people who are just super engaged. They're like the people who are just incredibly passionate about your community. So in the casual phase, you really want to focus on the access and the relationships, help people to have simple and effective problem solving, be able to build relationships effectively, provide plenty of training, webinars and programs, instructional blog posts and other different bits and pieces, maybe some formal mentoring. This is really powerful to help simplify how people settle into the pool that is your community. Now, for the regulars, this is all about collaboration. You've got these people who are pretty excited about how all of this stuff works. And what you want to make sure is that you can unlock their creativity, encourage people to maybe set up new projects and new events, matchmake people to work in new areas of your community. For example, let's say you're running a local group in your town and there's some community members who live in another town that's nearby. Maybe encourage them to organize another group there, have competitions and hackathons. It's about enabling them to have the confidence to go and do these interesting things. And then for the core people, this is about tapping into their wisdom. Here's a tip, right? No matter what you're doing, whether you're building products or software or building communities, the answers to all of your questions live in the heads of your audience, okay? And we want to tap into that. And our core members have got so much expertise they can share. So share regular one-on-one sessions with them, involve them in the design and the planning of your future community projects, bring them into a channel where they can discuss these things. It's all about unlocking that creativity. So this is the journey that I recommend. And one of the things we do to keep people moving forward is we apply a series of incentives, which I'm going to get to a little bit later on. But what I do want to focus on before I get to that is the second area. And this is that we design for people, right? It's easy, especially in open source, for us to talk about technology and computers and machines and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, there's a human psychology that we need to understand. And the way it looks a little bit like this is that when you join any community or any group, and this happened today, first of all, you have access to it. You need to get access to go and participate. Then when you start contributing and doing some interesting things, you kind of get a sense of how it works. It starts building some self-respect that you can figure this stuff out, that you can understand this new world that you're entering into. When this happens over and over again, you keep contributing, you keep building that self-respect, it builds a sense of dignity. And this means that you really feel like you've got some worth in this community that you're a part of. And then that gives you the confidence to have an impact. That means you can think bigger and you think of new and interesting ideas and propose things that haven't been done before without worrying about, people kind of knocking you down. When this happens over and over again, it builds a sense of belonging. And this is the ultimate treasure in any community, any workplace, any family, is that you feel part of something. And that if you were to go away, you'd be missed. Okay. The key thing here is access and belonging. We start with access, make sure people have got equal access to join your community, and focus on all the different pieces that they need to go through to get to that point of belonging. Always be focused on this human psychological element, because if you forget this, you're just basically tweaking software. Okay. The tricky thing here is that there are millions of things out there that can distract us away from people coming to your communities. This is an actual photo taken inside of a human brain. This is how much junk we've got in our brains, right? The Tiger King, good example. So what makes people want to try something new? It's very simple, is that it provides clear value. It does something really relevant and interesting to them. So for example, Firefox, right? They make it very clear why you should use their browser. These are the benefits of using it. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation makes it very clear about what they do to bring value to the infrastructure space, okay? So that's one thing that's really important, to focus on what is the value that someone's going to get out of your community, whether it's your group, your open source project, or something else. And then the third thing that I want to touch on here is incentives. We are, as human beings, really incentivizable, and we're all guilty of this, right? We collect we used to collect airline miles until there was no airplanes anymore. We get Reddit karma. We collect these little stamps on coffee cards. When you get your 10th stamp, you get free coffee. We collect video game trophies and badges and Fitbit and places like that. And what's awesome about this is that if we see something that's interesting, we're willing to work for it. And the reason for that is that psychologically, we're hunter-gatherers, right? Is that we're always wanting to make sure we can protect ourselves and have enough sustenance and food and all that kind of stuff. And this is just wired into our brains, because our brains really haven't had an upgrade in a long time. Now, there's two ways in which you can approach these incentives. One is called stated and one is called submarine. So for the stated incentives, what you do is you say, if you do this thing, you will get this thing. Okay. So for example, GitHub has a game off, and this is where if you participate in the competition, you will get the prizes in the competition. HackerOne has got a leaderboard where if you go and participate in it, you may get particular rewards based upon the reputation that you've generated. Many of you may be familiar with Stack Overflow. If you do a certain thing, you get one of these badges, such as if your question is favorited by 25 people, you get the favorite question badge. So I think wire into your community lots of these specific things. Okay, give very clear incentives that if you do this great work, or if you demonstrate the behavior that we want to see, you will be rewarded in some way. And this doesn't have to be swag. It can be just a thank you. It can be public recognition. It's more about the incentive and the reward and the recognition. The other type of incentive here is what I call a submarine. And these are kind of the sneaky cousin. These are the most fun ones to put together. And essentially what you do is you use computers to to detect when someone's done something that you want to happen, and then you reward them in a very human way. So to give you an example, one of the things I often do with my clients is when they reach a particular trust level in a platform called Discourse, we recognize them publicly. We say, thank you for their amazing contributions. We highlight them. We often send them a swag kit. And it's because they've contributed consistently to a particular point that we've measured. Another example of this is our friends at opensource.com. When people have contributed a certain amount of content to their website, they will send people swag. Mattermost will send people mugs with their name written on it when they submit their first contribution. And another example of this at opensource.com is when people have contributed a lot, they'll actually fly people out to Raleigh, where they'll join a day of meetings to work on opensource.com and what it means and how it can be grown. But they'll also get to go to All Things Open, and they'll get to meet people like Jim Whitehurst, who was the CEO of Red Hat and is now the president of IBM. This network of minds is amazing, okay? And we're only just beginning to tap into the potential here. So I'd encourage you to go and think about these things and what it means for your community. And then just to very briefly wrap up, as I mentioned earlier on, I've got a new book out. It's called People Powered. Thrilled it just won an award recently at the Business Book Awards, and it's got pretty decent reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, and it's a bestseller. So go and check out the book. And what might be relevant to you is I've set up a page for this event. If you go to jonobacon.com/pack and pop in your email address, I'll send you 2 copies of the book two chapters from the book, both in print and in audiobook. We'll send you a PDF in the audiobook. I'm also going to send you a whole bunch of templates and then some video, kind of additional video training and guidance that might be useful to you as well. All right. And with that, I'm going to check out. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Well, it's a real honor, first of all, to be here. Thank you all for joining, especially given the times that we're in. It is really exciting. And thank you, Mr. Bacon, for your speech. Hello there. I'm a big fan of yours. I know we spoke backstage. I just want to say hi again. But yes, hello, everybody. I am Dr. Shannon Brown. I am Chief Technology Officer at a company called North Studio. And yeah, a big part of my session is going to be focused on what is it that defines a great open source engineer. And I did a lot of thinking about this topic and kind of reflecting on not just my career itself, but the progression of the history of open source when I was preparing for this talk. And back when for many of us, back when I first was back in undergrad, and that was, as my niece would say, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth about 18 or 20 years ago, the concept of open source was not really anything. It didn't really exist, at least not in the sense that we knew it. When they were training us for school, or when we were, training in undergrad, the heaviest focus was, learning the basics of coding, of course. That was always the foundation for the house, and refining your skills, learning about compilers and binary code and all of these things that really teach you to address the hallmarks of what engineering is, but not necessarily craft mastery beyond the coding skills. And then when you got to the more senior level of your academic program, usually the options were to focus on Java or C++ coding. There really weren't many frameworks at that time, if any. The focus was IDEs, more frameworks. And that was the thing. And then, there was a huge push to mostly progress then over to basically the idea of getting a certification in one or more major platforms, as far as IBM, Microsoft, all of the big boys that were around at the time. And that was going to be the key to a prosperous career. Well, over time, as PHP became a much bigger mainstay in the market, you saw a big kickback on proprietary systems, particularly those that had, big license tags. And so this shift really happened as to how we think about computing. And now, this concept of making a career in open source has really evolved. And so first I thought about what the definition of great is. And I think that is something to definitely talk about, and that I'll go over in more detail in my fuller session. But to me, it's not just one stack or one platform, right, anymore. It is just having a wide variety of industry knowledge to the point that you have mastered your craft. Now, there's there's a number of flavors of ways to think about that. If you want to specialize, that's one way to do it. If you want to be sort of a jack of all trades, that's also a way to do it. Freelancing has also become way more common in our industry, as many of you know. But I think what Mr. Bacon also touched on as well, that is a key theme of my presentation, is that, outside of the main foundation of the house, which is coding, which will always be important. I compare it to, Chef Gordon Ramsay, which is that, he's a big, everybody knows his name, the big 5-star, chef and multiple Michelin stars. And, we see him on reality TV and big presence and all the yelling, but behind all of that marketing and all of that presence and persona, was a really bright, dedicated chef who was very, very good at what he did, who worked really long nights and, mastered his craft. And then beyond that, the takeoff happened. And so that will always be the foundation of the house. But to really make the rest of the house a house, it's the communication. It is the people presence. It is the social skills. And I think that what you will find is, as a leader, particularly as you work your way up in your career, even as you start in your career, as you get out of school, it's more than just, or if you're not, a school person, that's totally fine too. As you progress in your career, you will find that, as I have found, that communication is really the cornerstone of a lot of other things, and that includes your interview skills. I think that that's another thing that people should think of as its own skill set in the realm of soft skills that is so important, as far as the concept of what is it that you're looking to achieve from the organization you are interviewing with, and what is it that they can offer you as an engineer, and what can you offer them. It's a meeting of the minds, and for organizations as well, understanding what to look for in engineers who are going to be with you a long time, who are going to bring not just the skills to the table, but the collaboration and being able to grow with your company and with the model of the design. One of the things I touch on, and, for a little backstory about myself. So I got my doctorate about 4 years ago from Capella University. I graduated 4.0 GPA, top of my class. I was the first Black woman on the planet to ever be published, to have an advanced degree from my school of this type. And I was the first person in the world to ever publish a dissertation specifically on Drupal. And the topic of it was a quantitative study on Drupal in academia and the motivations for contributing to open source as a whole. So understanding this concept. And long story short, what I learned from going through that research, being a published author, is that the outcome of that experiment and the statistical analysis of interviewing nearly 500 people in the open source community is that the only real statistical correlation that you find as to why people are doing this is indeed to build a career, to build a legacy, to build something that is indeed going to feel like a community, or something for which, as Mr. Baker touched on, for which that if they left or if they were no longer part of, they would be missed. And that's the fuller picture, is still the people aspect of this entirety. So, and thinking about this, the other thing to consider is, so how do you stay in this for the long run? Because it is a high intensity field. As many as you know, it is can be very deadline intensive. There's a lot of money involved in it. So how do you self-sustain? And talking about the burnout factor with the people factor, right? One interesting statistic, I did some research before getting ready for this panel. And I was really shocked to learn that as of 2017, we in the technology field have the highest turnover rate of any industry, more than even the restaurant industry or the food industry. They have a turnover rate of about 13%. We have a turnover rate of about 13.2%. The big companies like Google and Yahoo, you guys want to know what I was really struck to hear this, but you guys know what the turnover rate there really is? The average tenure for an engineer now at Google and Yahoo and the other top 5 companies is just 13 months. That's it, 13 months. That's how short it is. And understand that there's a lot to that is by design. And I think a lot of people don't know that. And understanding sort of this churn and burn culture we've developed and what that's doing to us as an engineers, and how to self-sustain that. And I think that at the end of the day, you've got to focus on a number of things, which of course is work-life balance. That's always a big part of it. But trying to focus, and organizations too, it's not just the engineers, organizations realizing that this is contributing to a lot of turnover. Turnover is of course very costly, particularly when you have big long-term projects. I think it's fundamentally better to admit you've underbid a project than to lose a tech lead for 6 months and to be left in a lurch, because then the ripple effect of that, it can be far worse than a few $1,000s that you might have had to reconcile with a client. And so thinking about this in a more totalistic understanding of our culture as engineers and where we are, what happened, how did we get here? Again, I talk more about that in my session. But in a nutshell, it's understanding what I think, where you want to go. Do you want to be, are you a more in the weeds person? Are you a more social person? And how to find that overlap. The more you work your way up on the totem pole, the more communication is going to be a big cornerstone and a vital part of what you do. Writing is going to be a huge part of what you do. Writing proposals, your boss needs that. RFP writing, your boss needs that. They need people who can speak intelligently to clients in a way that's engaging without going over their head too much. And the more you can be a part of that fuller business model, the more doors that are open to you. And so experiment with what your passion is. And a lot of that work is outside of just your immediate job. It's outside of just whatever, sometimes even what your job can provide you. It's the social skills. Again, as Mr. Bacon was saying, with meetups, I love meetup.com. It's a big part for myself that works primarily for Drupal, WordPress, full stack, Angular, React type of setups. It's been immeasurable for us in networking with our own community. We have our own conferences there as well, and those are also critical things. Once again, developing those social skills, getting reliable tools. Reliable tools equals reliable work. As I say, just like for a carpenter, their tools are hallmarks of what they do, and they get very expensive tools, as many of you know, because you've got to do that to do reliable work. It's the same for us. Invest in quality tools for your developers. If your organizations, invest in good training. I am surprised at how many organizations don't really provide standardized training methods for all of their engineers on an ongoing basis. I also think that's contributing to churn and burn. Invest in them. They're, for software engineering, it's the hallmark of your it's the core of your engine room. So you should invest in it wisely. Listen to your engineers. Listen to their voice. Make sure to guard against the concept of constant emergencies. Remember that our industry is one that people are always going to want it right now, right? Everybody wants their stuff on the website right now, drop everything, all of that. But in our world, to sort of proctor against what I call false emergencies, which is the concept that everything is an emergency, it should really only be 2 or 3 real definition emergencies in your organization for any type of regular deployment shop. It is when a production site is launching or a production system is down. Or otherwise, the other exception is if your organization has things like some type of emergency contract or things like that where you have to get a response within 24 hours. That too, of course, is an on-call service that you would set up. But otherwise, it is just regular course of business for most cases. And that can also really help cut down on engineer burnout. I also think that that hybrid models of Agile can cut down on what I call sort of conceptual deadlines that don't really have a lot of meaning. The whole 2-week sprint thing works well to get sort of a schedule and developing or understanding where you are. But as far as like this pressure to kind of deliver every 2 weeks, just be mindful of that. Again, I look forward to seeing many of you at my longer session. If you want more information, please go to www.northstudio.com to learn more about us. And specifically about this talk, there is a link for HTTPS collaboration.northstudio.com. And specifically, if you want to speak more about this topic with myself and mention this talk, you would get up to 5 free hours for any new contract.
Thank you so much for joining me today for the open source in the time of COVID-19. So I want to be clear that this is not a talk about productivity. I don't want you to just jump in and start putting as much pull requests and contributing to open source. Do what you need to do in this time. And if Animal Crossing or baking sourdough or doing nothing is helping you, that's the right thing for you to be doing. We do have an opportunity to shape and direct the way we work, to embrace more strategies and processes from open source. And I'm happy to talk about those over in chat or in the Microsoft Azure booth area. So I'm going to get personal here, and I might get a little feels. It started with a slight fever. My 3-year-old son seemed a bit irritable, and his temperature was measuring at 99 degrees. So we weren't really worried. It wasn't a high fever. We'd been following our stay-at-home orders here in Santa Clara, and the last socialization we'd had was at his preschool. So it wasn't a big deal until the next morning. His screams woke me up. "I can't breathe, Mama." He was burning up, and his temperature was 104. He was gasping, he was wheezing. And on one level, I knew that talking was a sign that he was breathing, because you can't talk if you can't breathe. On another, there was a slow panic brewing. Like, what is this? We called our doctor and they said, come in. And we went to one of these drive-in clinics and we're told to wait in the car. I hadn't thought through it, the whole idea of Frankie meeting a doctor he doesn't know and personal protective equipment. He's only 3. So we explained that the doctor was a superhero who wanted to help him feel better. Now, Frankie appreciates a good superhero story. So he let the doctor take his temperature, take his blood pressure, and his oxygen saturation. Frankie wasn't sick enough to be tested, but we were told, assume that he is positive for COVID. So now we were going into a next level of isolation. Those next 2 weeks tested me in ways that I just frankly wasn't prepared for. I was watching worldwide impacts and death tolls mounting. I was watching my son struggle, and every night, all of this screaming. Then my partner's grandmother died. So I've dealt with so many personal crises, but this was at a level at which I've never felt before. Well, some people talk about having an anxiety disorder and it like enabling them in this catastrophe is a superpower. For me, it felt like, wow, all of my coping strategies are gone. I can't go and have coffee with my friends and just talk and let go. I was feeling very overwhelmed. Working from home isn't new to me. This level of anxiety and lack of certainty was beyond anything I've experienced before. I'm a developer advocate at Microsoft, supporting open source. So my job is essentially to constantly learn, connect with people across different communities, sometimes write code, speak, write documentation, and support the community through building bridges into companies. How do I do any of that when we are all faced with this onslaught of some personal and global scale trauma? I'm privileged. I have a job. I have solid management that have been thoughtful through this whole period and communicated next steps every part of the path as we have progressed through this disease. I've still struggled. My creativity, my purpose in work, my flow felt blocked. Today, I want to talk about my path to finding meaningful work, even in this time of crisis, and how community can support you through building and strengthening your relationships, learning new skills, and contributing in meaningful ways. So, prior to all of these events, I had started talking to Carolyn, who is this amazingly smart, awesome engineer here at Microsoft. She has been involved in so much different communities with an open source, and she is so well known for creating welcoming and inclusive communities. She has this project called Porter. And Porter is this project to help encapsulate all the different ways that you might want to manage everything it takes to install, uninstall, upgrade, and operate an application. So like Helm or Terraform or AZ, the Azure CLI, or AWS or kubectl. It includes bash scripts or configuration files, Docker images, all of these different things. So something that I'm very interested in. So there are a lot of projects out there right now that are doing COVID-related initiatives that can help and support people. Those areas were not something I could even consider helping out. The feelings even now are just still raw. So that wasn't an option for me. But I knew that Porter appealed to me because it was solving one of these complex infrastructure challenges that's often overlooked. It's dealing with the glue that between different components. So rather than dumping individuals into a project with this long checklist of like, step 1, set up this Docker container. Oh, even before that, install this Docker and then set up this container and then set up these other pieces in your infrastructure before you get to the point of developing or installing code. Porter solves that. You create a manifest and get people going faster. So there are 2 primary community channels outside of GitHub issues for communication with the team, Zoom and Slack. There's this additional maintainer meeting to get together and talk about what's next and squash particular issues that have come in. So once I had my base needs met, right? I've got security, I've got a solid path to getting food for my family, my child is feeling better. Now I was trying to find the capacity to work again, that motivation. This weekly maintainer meeting was so critical for me because it was an opportunity to connect with other people doing the work, but also connecting with people. During my first bug squash, I learned about the different labels that are used to qualify different issues that are raised. I really like the use of the different emojis to signal not just the urgency, but also sets the tone for the collaboration with the team. This is like a little hack that I never even thought about. And I mean, you could debate whether chocolate or donuts or pizza are more important, but it was just a little bit of humanity that I needed. I was promoted from community member to contributor. Being recognized for my contributions of providing feedback about the bugs and helping to close some of them really mattered to me. In that moment, I felt like something was starting to unblock me. I felt just a little bit better. So I was determined to keep contributing. I wanted to continue to feel more normal, if there can be such a thing as feeling normal right now. Porter is written in Go, and that's an opportunity for me to learn Go while also contributing to open source. It's not something I already know. I started walking through the contributing guide and discovered some discrepancies in the process. So at the next maintainers meeting, when we were reviewing the roadmap, I asked to have improved the new contributor experience added, and now I have a project. As I was thinking about all of these different pieces, I realized that it's in alignment with the 5 components that are often recognized as being part of being happy in work. This freedom to choose what you're working on, being challenged, learning from your work, having a positive atmosphere to work in, and making meaningful contributions. Happy might not be the right descriptor to use right now, but I do find that these same qualities helped me bridge out of the anxiety funnel I was in. Spending time talking to awesome, welcoming people, working on a project that I didn't already know the ins and outs, and a language I don't know, felt like this achievable challenge. I'm learning new things regularly. Like last week, I learned that with Go modules, we don't need import comments anymore, so I can eliminate some code rather than allowing it to just stay and suffer in this repository. So I'm making meaningful contributions that help people. The open source community has been doing remote communication and collaboration, so we're really well prepared for social distancing. Research from Dr. Nicole Fosgren on GitHub repositories shows that other people must be recognizing this value of the positive feelings as well, because code contributions are thriving. So you can find your community, your project. You can help the COVID projects. You can also find your areas of interest. If you love puppies, there might be a puppy project that could use your help right now. If you're passionate about improving the infrastructure experience, maybe join me and Carolyn over at Onboarding. Find your people first, then find your project. VM's book on Forge Your Future with Open Source is an excellent resource for finding a project if you're completely new to open source. Or you can come hang out with me in the Azure booth after this talk, and we can help find you a project to contribute to. But I want to encourage you to challenge yourself and find projects that are working in languages and tool sets that you might not be familiar with. Your contributions in design, visual diagrams, support, documentation, and a myriad of other areas will be meaningful. We're all suffering right now in different ways. Be kind to yourself, value what you can contribute if you can contribute, and bring kindness with your contributions. Help nourish the positive environment of open source community. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to share my story. I hope you lean into the available support from the open source community. If you want to check out our Microsoft Azure booth and learn some new skills, there's also some documentation here that I've linked to. As again, I've mentioned before, I'll be over in the booth and I'm happy to help you make your first contribution to open source.